Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. Welcome to TRADEPRO Academy. It's Victorio from TRADEPRO Academy, and in today's video we are going to be breaking down trading the extended trading hours, or trading Globex, right? Whatever you want to call it. The overnight session, Globex, ETH. So throughout this video, I'm going to be breaking down one of the time sessions where we can trade futures, because the futures market realistically is open almost 24/7. So there's a lot of opportunity and possibility, not just during the US regular trading hours, but for everyone that's in a different time zone, like myself, I'm in Europe. There are possibilities throughout different sessions, and right, as a matter of fact, the most gains in the overall market do happen on the overnight. So there are a lot of possibilities, and I'm going to be breaking down how to trade the Euro session, mainly the Euro session, the ETH session, in this video. One thing to mention before we start, the futures market operates pretty much, like I said, almost 24/7. It closes during 1 hour throughout the day between 5 and 6 p.m. and then it reopens. It reopens on Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and then it closes at 5 p.m. Eastern time on Friday for the weekend. So during that time, from 6 p.m. Eastern time into 9:29:59 a.m. the next day, the markets are going to be open, meaning that during that time, there are generally 3 different sessions. I kind of break them down into 2 different sessions that are tradable and that have a lot of opportunity. So we have the Asian session, which typically starts around 7-8 p.m., something like that Eastern time, until about like 2 to 3 a.m. Eastern time, something like that. And then the Euro session, or the London session, starts about 3 a.m. Eastern time into 11 a.m. Eastern time. So that is the main session that I'm going to be trading, that 2 a.m. spot to about 11 a.m. spot on the overnight session. And I'm going to be breaking down how to do that even without too much order flow. So this trading strategy is based on generally breaking down the market movement from the past few sessions in terms of auction theory, volume, and delta to get a better understanding of what's going on. The strategy that I use isn't like tick by tick. It's not very scalpy. I'm trying to find a large move on the overnight session, and I'm going to be breaking it down throughout this video. So if you guys are excited and you're in a different time zone, wondering what markets you can trade, this is the video for you. So let's jump into the intro, and then I'll see you guys at the screens. Traders, let us talk about different sessions and trading different sessions in the futures market. So as you all know, or you may not know, that the futures market has multiple different sessions that are involved in it realistically. And there's 3 main sessions. I guess you can kind of look at it from a grand perspective in terms of 2 main sessions, and then those 2 main sessions can be split up a little more. The 2 main sessions are the extended trading hours, which a lot of people call Globex, and then the regular trading hours, which a lot of people do just call the New York or the US Open, the US market session. So first and foremost, right, the ETH, the Globex session, is a combo of the Asian and London session. So the Asia/Euro session, London/EU, right? That's when that side of the world, this side of the world, the side that I live on, actually wakes up and gets active in the markets. And London's probably the biggest constituent of, I guess, US activity, US market activity in the EU. So during these sessions, during these overnight sessions, the ETH session, as we call it, there's a lot less volume being traded. So during these hours, a lot less volume, but there's more time realistically. So compared to the New York session or the RTH session. And right, on occasion, they can be a little more active. So all of this, right, generally slower, a lot less volume. For example, if I give you an instance, every morning I look at the ETH volume that's been traded so far leading into the RTH to give me an understanding of what the potential movement and volatility might look like on the RTH. So generally speaking, throughout that longer period of time, we usually have between 100,000 to 300,000 contracts traded on the S&P 500. So moving into that, right, if we're close to the 300,000 band mark in terms of contracts traded pre-market, I generally have a better understanding that there could be more movement throughout that RTH. Now, to give you a reference point, the RTH usually has over about a million plus contracts that trade during that session compared to the longer period time frame, the ETH, which generally trades around, let's say on average, 200,000 contracts on the S&P 500 futures. So this vast difference in volume suggests that there is generally lesser movement, and the decreased volume also means that order flow, right, reading the DOM, staring at the DOM, might not be the most helpful tool slash the best use of time, best use of confirmation, if you will. So there are other order flow tools that are fairly helpful, but the DOM might not be the one that you gravitate towards, which I think is a very, very big topic because a lot of, well, maybe not all of it, but a decent portion, right? Maybe 40, 30% of what it is that I use to actually trade is going to be the DOM and order flow. So the ETH is very well known to have some fairly large moves, and a lot of the market gains actually overall are made in that overnight session. One of the common strategies that I've seen a lot of people talk about and implement is actually buying large downside moves during the RTH session on the SPY, for example, into the close, and then closing them out the next day. So, yet there is a fairly calm way to trade these markets in these extended trading hour sessions. They don't move as much, meaning that you might claw your eyes out there sitting watching for hours for it only to move like, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 points in a very, very long period of time on the S&P 500. On the NASDAQ, right, there could be more favorable moves, even though, again, they are a lot slower. But the NASDAQ, which is an asset that we're going to be talking about today, along with the S&P 500, can be maybe a little more favorable to trade during that EU session. So the question is, how is it that I trade the EU session? I'm based in Europe, so there are a lot of opportunities. I do usually have some trades that are considered pre-market or in the ETH. So I'll typically look at the ETH session around maybe 1 to 2 a.m. Eastern time to see what's happening, right? To give you a little reference point, right? Just a little review. The overnight session split up into the Asian and the London session. The Asian session typically starts around 9 a.m. Eastern time, right? Depending on daylight savings, stuff like that. The London session generally around 2 a.m. Eastern time. So around 2 a.m., 1 a.m., 3 a.m. Eastern time is when I look at the market a little more in depth and see, okay, there could be some kind of opportunity, see what's happening, see what's going on. So what are the main tools? If I'm kind of disregarding the DOM in that sense, I can still use order flow aspects, but there are specific tools and a market, I guess, read, or I guess a market philosophy, if you will, that I mainly use, and you guys have probably heard me blab about it a lot, auction market theory. So auction market theory is the main component and proponent of what it is that I actually use to trade the overnight sessions, which is a lot that we're going to be going through in a few different charts, along with, right, one of my favorite order flow tools, if not maybe my favorite, Delta. So Delta and the auction market theory are going to be the main components that allow me to identify what is going on. So I can have fairly simple understanding of just levels and areas that I want to trade. Why is that? So auction market theory allows me to pinpoint areas of extremes where there was heavy market participation or weak market participation that created strong-headed market traders that either created a directional move, right, a failure of a directional move, whatever it is, to allow me to identify a trade opportunity. Now, delta is the aspect of imbalance. Imbalanced order flow is a very, very important factor because imbalances are what actually moves markets directionally. So I can just use those two simple tools and identify just areas where I want to trade. Now, this is another aspect. Since I'm holding a position usually for a longer period of time during these ETH sessions, I generally, right, it could be a few hours of a hold. I'll generally use a slightly wider stop in essence, along with wider targets. So on the S&P 500, simply put, I'll during the RTH session, I'll use something of around a 3 to 4 point stop, right, on the S&P 500 futures. So during the ETH session, I might widen that to about like 5 to 6 points so I can give it a little more wiggle room because I'm treating this kind of like a day-long swing slash potentially a 2 day long swing. And my targets, if I'm trading the RTH, are usually right to begin with and seeing if 10 to 12 point more. Now, if I talk about the NASDAQ in the same regard, NASDAQ usually stop on a day-to-day basis on the RTH. I know it's kind of tight, but somewhere there, maybe depending on volatility, and I'm looking for around 30 until I can run the rest. The extended trading hour session, right? I'm probably going to use something I'm looking for at least like 50 plus points on the move. Now, this also means that I'm sizing down right on the RTH. Maybe I'll trade this few contract so I can just keep the risk at doubling most. That means I'm having my contracts. Well, maybe not double the risk, but something of the sort. So I need to drop down the size of the contracts that I use, right? Because I'm still looking for larger moves. I'm just taking on a little more risk. So in theory, right? In theory, it's fairly simple to identify levels, right? All you have to do is kind of just pinpoint the directionality in the market and just place those trades in anticipation of XYZ occurring, right? But to understand that is where the complexity starts to come a little into this whole plan and strategy. So what I do is I'll generally gather all the information that's recently been given based on the volume profiles over the last few sessions, identify where we are, how we got there, and the area that I want to trade, right, based on these imbalances that have been created. So I'll give you a few examples and I'll break down exactly what it is that I do. So the tools that I'll be going through today are the cumulative profile, right? The weekly profile, the session profile, and the delta profile. So the cumulative profile, you've probably seen this a lot realistically. It is the 200-day or 100-day profile here that you can see in the gray. The weekly profile actually breaks down every week in its own real composition of a profile. I'll be looking at the S&P and the NASDAQ together to find some kind of opportunities realistically. But this is, let's find it. This is what the weekly profile looks like. So each week, each individual week is a like gives of where there's heavier light volume, where the key extremes are, where the balances are, and I can compare that in a real. And right, I'll be using the session by session profile, be a little more lean in terms of the directional imbalances based on order flow, right? Based on delta. So this chart right here, I'll just use a session by session one for this to kind of clear out where these larger imbalances might sit. So using these four tools, I can construct an idea of direction and honestly just trade that. Pinpoint the level, try the level, and continue on with that. So I'll take a look. We'll take a look at some of the trades that I've taken based on some of that information and try to understand what's going on just based on the ETH, right? And then we'll kind of wrap up those trades. We'll reverse engineer them and create a plan in terms of how I actually trade that ETH. And what it is I look for, break down on the overnight session when I'm trying to identify direction, where we're currently at, where it might continue or fail, and so on. So let's take a look at some of these trades here. And so we'll go over like the last few sessions here from the overnight session from September 10th and 11th. Those are the trades that I actually took on the overnight on these minis. So I've been trading kind of minis on the overnight, and then up here some micros on the NASDAQ. So as you can see, right, this is the first positioning over here into this 5470 area on the ES, and I usually just trade threes. So nice little bounce off this area over here twice now. It took me out at almost like break even on the last one and then picked it up again. So why this area? Why this area on the S&P 500? We had on the overnight session from the 9th, or sorry, from the 10th of September into that at 70/54 to 65 area. So what I'm using is these auctions, and it's very important for me to understand what happens from the prior days leading up into it so I can get a directional understanding, and we'll take a look at how the delta kind of gets perceived in that region. So what I'm doing is I'm just identifying where these big bets, right? This is an important factor for me. We can split the and area balance over here. So this area is actually 54, like 65. So 54, 65 area all the way up into about. And balance is important because when we accept into a balance to the upside, what happens is that price is allowing a lot of buy side pressure to get into an area that has super heavy volume, which means if we can close a session, reopen a session in that area, I am most likely looking for that long side to hold at this balance region. So if I'm looking at what happens here, right, I'll break down a few days prior to understand what's going on generally in this market. So I can look at this and say, even from like September 6th, we can really break this down and get a better understanding of how this market's actually shaping up. So September 6th, right, we have this massive balance over here that starts under 54, like 10ish area. Then we have this like midpoint region over here at this like 54, 35, 40. So when I'm looking at this right from the Friday, we get this massive downside move that actually closes within this major balance, which for me puts some bearish pressure on this. If we're allowing prices to close through a bearish balance to the downside, right? It's a matter of, can we reopen that area underneath to get that continuous press to the downside? So I'd be selling realistically here. This is the overnight session from that day going into Sunday. Generally, I don't get too active, but we get a push. We get a push back up and we're starting to make a move inside this balance. So that negates that downside for me. We have this B-shaped profile and you can see it's very, very thin volume. So once that thin volume actually gets broken down, meaning that once we start moving away from this heavier volume into the thin volume, right, this balanced area over here, right around this like 45 area, you can start looking at this as potential movement back to the upside swing. But I'm also focused on where these massive balances actually lie. So on the 9th, we get this move up, right, from the actual RTH. The dark backgrounds are the RTH, and we close within this balance. For me, that's bullish, meaning that on the overnight session, if I'm trading this on the overnight session, I have an understanding that there is very, very heavy volume over here that's holding the bottom area of this balance region. And we're inside that balance, meaning that this is a major, major support structure where I can be a dip buyer realistically to continue that momentum to the upside. So I'm going to be looking for longs at 54.65 to 73, right? It's about like a few point area. Realistically, you got like 8.7 point area, which is fairly large. So I just want to kind of pinpoint where I can get in with maybe like a 5 to 6 point stop. So I can kind of just trust that area without reading too much into it, because the DOM might not show me at that overnight session that speed, because this area could translate to like hours and hours of actually holding out and making it out. So I'm going to be long. I want to be long from that area. I want to be a buyer from that area. So if I take a look at what happens on the delta throughout that period, I can get a better understanding of order flow. So maybe I can pinpoint my entry a bit better based on what's going on. So if I'm looking at those last few days, right, I'm looking at this from a delta perspective, and I'm trying to find where people are congested. What I mean by congested, I mean that if there is a lot of people that are trapped at the highs or at the lows, that's important to me. So you have this huge positive delta in the following session. So people are getting trapped into those highs. However, right, leading into this, right, I had that pinpointed area around this like mid 60 to like low 70. So if I'm looking at these days as they go by, right, I'm looking at this and thinking, well, realistically, right, this was Friday, that's the next overnight Sunday, and then this is the Monday. So Monday leaves behind a trace of all of this negative delta into the low, and we close above, telling me that these guys are trapped, and most likely, right, the top band of that delta is most likely going to act as a support region. So the top band of that delta starts about 68, right? Around that 68 region, 68 to about 64. So I just pinpointed a 4 point area where I can get long into these guys. Now, as the auction completes, we get a lot of positive delta, and these guys are kind of trapped. So that's not the best of signs, right? Ultimately resulting in some kind of downside move that we saw here on Wednesday, right? But leading into that, I'm looking at these guys and trying to pinpoint, okay, there's a decent little batch of clustered negative delta again, right, on the next day that happens as we continuously hold in the large balance above this 68.70, right around that 70 region, right? This is on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, if I'm looking at that overnight session, I can pinpoint, well, the start of that cluster of delta is again at the low band of the larger auction. So I can look to play into that area as well. So if I'm looking at how that shapes up, right, the next day on these larger balances over here, again, I can pinpoint the same region that I'm looking at, right, for the following day. So we have it right here, something like this over here. And what happens, right? This is the overnight that we're interested in. That holds out into the support structure over here. The next day we close back above this. There longs into that region. And I can point from the along with the delta that we just saw from this individual session on the 10th going into the 11th. So again, if I'm looking at these individual areas, I'm looking at where the balance is from the market profile as well. So the value area low sits somewhere here, single print, and the volume drops off right here. So I'm in 70 area. It gives me a better pinpoint of where that region might be. So instead of looking at like 65, let's say, from all that negative delta from the prior session, I can say, well, you know what? It actually looks like they could be moving a little higher, and I could be getting a better entry maybe at 70 on the next overnight session based on that. So if I'm looking at what I did, you see this is the area from that like 65, 68, right? Picked it up twice, kind of closed it out as we reopen the session. And then the next day, what we have over here, I kind of got a little trigger happy and I got the 80, right? Thinking that the 80 was going to actually hold out. We held it out prior to that. It held pretty well here. Picking out the 80 instead of over here where we just broke down that value area low along with volume drop off and the delta was closer to about 70. So I got stopped out for about 5 points from that 80. You pick it up again and then just close it out over here. Close it out because we're going into a report. We're going into the CPI. So I don't want to be super long into CPI. I don't know what happens. We can skip a bunch of beats and my stop can get triggered at like minus 10 points, for example, in that case. So that's how I'm generally looking at these overnight sessions, right? It's the same concept. Like if I was looking at it most recently, when we got this super massive move into the close. So we get a super, super heavy move into the close. And realistically, if I'm trying to play this on the overnight, right, we get a close that is at the top band of this distribution, right, around that like 60 region somewhere here. So realistically, we close back within it, right? I might be looking at this thinking, okay, the top band of the distribution, 55, 65 somewhere. Maybe I can get some longs. I looked at it. I didn't take any trades because it was so freaking slow, right? I was looking to continue that long momentum into that high, into that distribution top on that. You can see from this overnight session, this is what it presented. This is the top band. I put balance high, 55, 65 to about 61. So we grind up. Okay, we hold this at about 4:30 a.m. Eastern. I didn't take anything here. There could have been something realistically, but it was just so slow. I was like, you know what? I don't really want to play with this. I think I can go do something better. It chopped around for a bit, but honestly, it still presents that opportunity. Top end of the balance, if you're buying like 64, even you use a 4 point stop, you're getting a nice little move eventually up to that 80. So you're still presented with a decent move about like 16 points there. You're almost getting 20 points out of this. It's still a very viable opportunity. And I'm just looking to see if we can get, I'm only playing the overnight sessions, if we can get an acceptance above certain distributions or failures or below certain. If I'm looking at the current day right now, what's going on, right? I can look at this and break this down and say, okay, realistically, if we close above here, what happens? We close outside of a large distribution auction, right? So what that tells me is this is some bullish pressure. And if I'm trying to play this overnight situation, I'm looking at around 55, 70, we can call it, right? Into the 65. If we pull down back there, that really executes the longs for me because this is where the volume drop off starts. Heavy volume is below it. Top band of this auction, right? It looks pretty good. It is a pretty significant downside move to get back into that area realistically, but that area should hold to continue this upside momentum, right? If for some reason today we close the session down here, right, I'd be looking for the opposite where I can actually sell rallies on the overnight session to try to continue this momentum to the downside. So if we look at that a little deeper, maybe on a weekly chart, right, the weekly can give us a very good breakdown of what's going on as well. Now, to add to this, right, if I'm looking at this and we escape a massive distribution top somewhere over here, doesn't mean that I only have to play the pullback into that large distribution top. The individual session can give me an understanding of what's going on as well. Because over here, right, we have a little breakdown of single prints as well as where the volume kind of gets thick after the volume drop-offs, somewhere around like 55, 85. So I can pinpoint that area and I have two areas to get long should we close above this region. So I can look at that and say, you know what, those look like areas. Which one looks better? Maybe I can find something on different charts. Maybe the order flow can help me as I'm looking at Delta. So we'll open up the Delta chart here and let's take a look. So far today, what's going on, right? We have huge clusterings of delta into these tops. So around that 70 region, around 70, 72, massive positive delta, and we're closing above it. So that's telling me that that's a huge buy area where I can kind of get long and trust those buyers to defend this region if we get that larger pullback. It's pretty significant though, like 30 points. Over here, the clusters aren't that crazy, right, in terms of that delta, but there is some significance around that 85. Now, I can also use the weekly chart to give me more information as to where volume drops off in terms of a weekly perspective to give me an understanding of where these regions are. And if I'm looking at this right on today's session, where is that volume drop off where the heavy volume starts yet again, right? It sits somewhere around this region, right around, right, that like mid 70, low 70, nothing else in between. So maybe if I'm trying to get long 85, it could be pushing it a little. So if we get a decent pullback on the overnight, I have plans to look for that like mid 70. So by the time you're watching this, let me know how that plays out realistically if the momentum continues. So it's the same concept when I'm trading NASDAQ. Now, the good thing about NASDAQ is that it moves a decent bit on the overnight sessions, right, compared to the S&P. It's got generally larger moves, and the same concepts hold true. So if I'm looking at the same principles here, if I'm looking at the the ninth overnight, 10th actually, and then the 10th and 11th overnight, similar kind of construct that's going on. So on those sessions on NASDAQ, right, I got long into that like 580-ish area. 580 is a massive pivot, and we'll take a look at what that looks like for a decent little move. I got taken out on trailers here, didn't really maximize that. And then I tried to buy into that 760 right onto the September 11th, 10th, 11th going into it. 760 as we're above this distribution top, right? So where is 760? 18760. So that's pinpointed somewhere over here, right, where this distribution top is. I tried to buy into that because we've escaped into the next one. I got stopped out. It pulled down a little more, and then it pulled back up, tried to pick it up again. Didn't get filled full size, and I had to close it right before that news popped out. So still a decent little move there. So let's take a look at how that transpires. So again, step by step, I'm trying to understand where these large auctions are and what the individual sessions, what kind of information the individual sessions give to me. So I can start off here in the past, right, on this day, on the 6th, 7th, and try to understand, or 6th, 8th, and try to understand what's going on. So realistically, we have this like pretty big distribution that sits somewhere like, we can say like 600 all the way down into like 370. We close right at the ledge here on the Friday, right? And then we start moving back up and above it on the next overnight. So what that tells me, like the next day session in itself, I'm looking at that like 600, 580, right? I was trying to locate the longs at. And if we close above it here on this session, the overnight realistically has a good potential of holding that region where we have a lot of positive, or I should say not positive, but we have a lot of volume in that area that's trying to support it with a single print, right? As we can see, and the volume drops off right at that region. So between 580 and 600 marks the spot where I want to be present for the long side to continue this momentum move. So we looked at next day. The next day closes pretty strong to the upside, and I'm trying to just break down these auctions. So there's an auction here from this like that 770, we can say. So when we close above it, right, realistically, that's where I'm trying to gun for these longs, right? I'm trying to find these longs into that support, and you can see it pulls down a decent bit more, which kind of pulled me out of that, right? I got stuck out of that. And then once we move back above it, I'm still trying it because we're accepting into a new distribution to the upside, a new balance to the upside. So this area around that like 770, 760 realistically should hold support to see that next momentum push. And that's the trade that worked out. So it's the same concept as we're going into larger moves to the upside today. So we've seen multiple days swinging to the upside, and this day over here, right, this massive day closes well above this distribution top around 220-ish area. And it was a very, very shallow little pullback, barely touched it. I was trying to look for it, couldn't get long, didn't quite trade the area that I cared about. And we got a nice little pop from that on the NASDAQ, about like 100 points. So Same concept. Right now, what's going on? We're about to close above this auction top. So 360, 370, where the volume drops off on a single day, for me, around that area, if we pull back to that on the overnight, that looks like a feasible long to continue this momentum. So with futures, right, the good thing about this is that they trade on the overnight session. So regardless of the time zone that you're in, this strategy can be implemented without just staring at the DOM constantly. What you're doing and what information you're gathering from all this is the directionality, right, that's expected based on the prior days, as well as pinpointing an area, not only from these balances and volume profiles, but also from order flow to help you understand if that direction wants to hold realistically and where you can continue the momentum move. Now, if these things break down on the overnight, you can just use the opposite tools that I'm trying to explain here and use that in the opposite direction. So, for example, if NASDAQ breaks down into this auction, realistically, on the overnight, you look to sell into these highs to see that transition point in the movement. So it goes both ways. And all I'm trying to do is pinpoint where these massive areas are so I can just trade them on the overnight and just put the limit in, have a wider stop, let it do its thing, come back in a few hours. Maybe I'm stopped out, maybe it works out well. But it's not one of those things that you're just constantly staring at it, right? The moves aren't as jittery. They're not as quick paced as the RTH realistically. So there's a lot of potential and opportunity there to have these like intraday swings slash, right? Maybe swinging them into the next RTH if that momentum wants to continue. So if you enjoyed this video, right, you know what to do. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment down below. What session do you guys trade? And is this valuable information going forward? So I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.